The title of my talk is Our Skynet Moment. Now, Skynet, of course, is the hostile AI of the Terminator movies. How many people here have seen James Cameron's original Terminator or any of its sequels? So, fair number of you. But for those of you who haven't, the first of these movies, 1991, the internet was still in its infancy. So this idea of this global network somehow becoming self-aware was science fiction. But today, we're living in that science fiction. We're all connected, billions of people, billions of devices connected by this global network, which is increasingly infused with AI. And of course, this has led a lot of people to worry quite a bit. Elon Musk is one of the most notable of the people who's expressed fears of AI. Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Nick Bostrom, and many others, Sam Altman. But Elon said AI is the most serious threat to the survival of the human race. And I want to unpack this a little bit and talk about what's true about it and what's not, and to put it in a broader context. So, because there are people, some of whom you've heard from on this stage, who are actual practitioners of AI, who think that all those fears are fairly overblown. You know, Andrew Ng said, those of us on the front line shipping code, we're excited by AI, but we don't see a realistic path for our software to become sentient. You know, Jan LeCun at Facebook's AI research makes very similar comments. And I love Andrew's comment. He says, you know, there's a big difference between intelligence and sentience. There could be a race of killer robots in the far future, but I don't work on not turning AI evil today for the same reason I don't worry about the problem of overpopulation on Mars. That might be another dig at Elon Musk. But, you know, is AI really like worrying about the future of AI really like worrying about overpopulation on Mars? Let's think a little bit more about it. What does Elon actually express as a worry? What he has expressed are a couple of things, and one of them is the idea of the runaway objective function. Now, when Nick Bostrom first introduced this as a thought experiment many years ago, he used the idea of an AI that was running a factory that was designed to create paperclips. And the paperclip optimizer run awry, eventually decides that all humanity's in the way, and it goes on making paperclips forever. And Elon uses the same image, except his idea is a runaway, self-improving strawberry picking robot that says, hey, you know, it would be strawberry fields forever. You know, no room for human beings. Now, this is a recent quote. This actually is a great kind of human fear that goes back many, many years. This is a fabulous detail, actually, of a illustration by Edmund Dulac from 1001 Nights, commonly known as the Arabian Nights, you know, about jinns. You know, people could summon jinns. They had the idea that these beings of great power would be subject to their wishes. And the problem was that the jinns just kind of get it wrong. They don't quite understand what you mean, or maybe sometimes they're slightly malicious or troublemaking, but they misinterpret your wishes in a way that turns out to your disadvantage. Now, in popular culture, some of you may have seen Walt Disney's Fantasia, which is a scene with Mickey Mouse, and he's got his master's spell book, and he's figured out how to get this broom to help him carry the pails of water, except it's literally the runaway objective function. The brooms start multiplying and bringing more and more buckets of water until there's a flood, and he doesn't know what to do until he's rescued by his master. So that's really the runaway objective in a nutshell. You know, humanity has been worrying about that literally for 1,000 years. So I want to actually want you to hold this thought, because I'm going to come back to it in a couple of different ways. But before I do that, I do want to pick up on another point that Elon has made, which I think is very, very relevant. He said, look, AI might be the thing that starts World War III. That was his big fear. And he actually first expressed it when he said something about there might be a rogue trading algorithm that, for example, decides that triggering a war is actually the best way to optimize for its financial outcome. Maybe a bit far-fetched, but then you realize AI is already being used in very hostile ways. And Zeynep Tufekci, who, if you don't know her, is a wonderful observer of the use of technology by repressive governments. She has a book called Twitter and Tear Gas. Wonderful person to follow on Twitter. But she said, let me say this, too many worry about what AI, as if some independent entity, will do to us. Too few people worry what power will do with AI. And of course, if you think about it, face recognition, here's this, narrow AI technology. This technology has already been used to find people who are then killed and tortured. That's a real worry. And someone like Zeynep follows this, tracks this around the world. It is happening. It is a scary world, and it's only going to get worse. So we do have to think about these risks, even of narrow AI. Okay, that are used by power. It doesn't have to go as far as, sort of rogue independent algorithms. We're also increasingly seeing autonomous weapons. I hadn't realized this, the Samsung SGR-A1 autonomous gun has been in use in the demilitarized zone in South Korea since 2006. It's their way of looking at the overwhelming, number of humans that the North Koreans could throw at them, and they're saying, well, we'll use autonomous weapons. Now, of course, the other side of this is it's not a very smart autonomous weapon. It basically shoots at anything that moves in the demilitarized zone. And of course, Jan LeCun pointed out in a meeting I was with him recently, and he said, we've actually had autonomous weapons for a long time. They're called landmines, and they're pretty stupid, and so we ban them. And we might actually be better off with smarter autonomous weapons. But that's sort of a thought experiment that we will really have to struggle with. But we are getting smarter and smarter and potentially more dangerous autonomous weapons that will be used by people in power. And so here's one that I came across, Tyrannus. It's a stealth drone. It kind of looks like the B-1, invisible, weaponized, and while they say it does have limitations on what we give it in the mission plan. It can only fly in certain areas, but it does think for itself. It will navigate and it will search for targets. Man, that's like something out of Daniel Suarez's science fiction novel Kill Decision. So yes, there are some near-term worries. And of course, Vladimir Putin's recent remarks put us all on notice. He basically said artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but all of humankind. I don't think he meant that just as, leadership in this wonderful new technology is going to lead us into a new age of prosperity. What he meant was, guess what? We found out this actual great way to use it as a weapon. And cyber warfare did turn out to be a little different than we expected. Nobody was sort of thinking that this was going to be a tool of disinformation, that we'd have fake, AstroTurf bots, that are colonizing social media, that are influencing the turnout of the election, that these bots would be also exploiting loopholes in the way that Facebook's AI and other algorithmic systems were sort of generating content and what it was showing to people. So yes, here is weaponized AI turned against us. And that brings me back to this idea of the runaway objective function. So when we don't need things like the paperclip optimizer or the strawberry, picking optimizer. Here is a runaway objective function. Facebook says we got to create an ad inventory against any possible set of keywords, right? And clearly there were some keywords. Again, they weren't necessarily really used, but the fact is you can kind of see here that these algorithmic systems have implications that we don't yet fully understand, which is exactly the point of the Arabian mythology of the jinn, that there are unexpected consequences. My wife, Jen Palka, likes to say in the context of government, the only law that you can always count on being in effect is the law of unintended consequences. But I want to ask, what does this have to do with Skynet? And here's where I want to kind of get into this speculative area. I want to lay out a line of speculation that I cover in my new book, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, called WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. It's really about a lot of things about technology platforms and the role that algorithmic systems play in managing them and the new relationship between humans and whether you call it AI or simply algorithmic systems. and networks in our society. But it has a particular element that I want to lay out, and it's this idea that what if we're thinking about AI in the wrong way? What if strong AI, that fabled AI of the future that Elon's worried about, bears the same relationship to today's narrow AI as multicellular life does to prokaryotes? Now, it's a simple single-celled bacteria versus multicellular organisms. So this is a theory that Lynn Margulis kind of articulated called symbiogenesis. And she basically made the case, which at first was highly resisted, but eventually really it came to be widely accepted, that the multicellular life actually has bacteria inside of it. So for example, the chloroplast inside of a plant, inside of a plant cell has, if you look at its genetic history, is actually derived from a particular species of bacteria. If you look at mitochondria, they also are descended from another kind of bacteria. And so effectively, she makes the point that species form new composite entities. And of course, the biological symbiosis, that is us, doesn't stop there. We're now increasingly aware of something they call the microbiome. There's a great book about it called I Contain Multitudes by Ed Yong. And he says all zoology is really ecology. We can't fully understand the lives of animals without understanding our microbes and symbiosis with them. When we look at beetles and elephants, sea urchins and earthworms, parents and friends, we see individuals, right? Working their way through life as a bunch of cells in a single body, driven by a single brain, operating with a single genome. This is a pleasant fiction. In fact, we are legion, each and every one of us. Always a we and never a me. Heed Walt Whitman. I am large, I contain multitudes. So if that's true of us, could that also be true of a future AI? John Rawls says each animal is an ecosystem with legs. Well, what is the ecosystem of a future AI? What is its microbiome? So I want to take this even further. The microbiome affects our consciousness. This increasing notion that the bacteria in our gut affects our mood. But guess what? We're also tied in, our brain is plastic, and we have new knowledge poured into it, right? So, we go from genes to memes. Think about language. You acquire language from outside. It doesn't come built in to a child, right? And knowledge is passed from mind to mind, by language, by the printed word, and now, ever more quickly, by the internet. And we have these mind storms that go through our collective consciousness more and more quickly as a result of this new digital world. And we are part of this new superorganism that is now connected by the internet. So we make a lot of the fact that humans perform unsupervised learning, and we're looking to do that in AI, but we forget how much of what makes us human is acquired from other living humans, but also from knowledge passed on. We are the product of a great deal of supervised learning, a great deal of reinforcement learning. All these terms you hear about in AI apply to people as well. So the idea that it's just going to be magically, completely unsupervised is just wrong. I mean, we are not completely unsupervised. We are quite supervised. And we're being supervised in new ways and new collective ways. So if we think that our emergent proto-AIs are also compound beings, where does that lead us? First of all, you can kind of see how the rise of specialized chips for narrow AI functions like language recognition or image recognition is kind of interesting, because that's also specialized subsystems in the brain. But you also bring in that whole notion of the microbiome, and you start to say, oh, there are people inside these giant AIs. So here's a human inside a Google data center who's actually repairing something, swapping out a part. Think of that as somebody inside the cell. Think about the programmers who are building new functions, new code, implementing new ideas, the operations engineers. All of us are also contributing from the outside every time we make a link, every time we choose a result. That's input into this brain that Google is building. So we are co-creators of the future with the AIs in our midst, which aren't and may not ever be independent beings. They may be the nervous tissue collecting billions of human brains, augmenting them with silicon, and making possible things that we have not yet imagined. So in this regard, you also have to realize that we can put in this context of the corporation itself as a new artificial life form, with humans and computers as its microbiome. And this is even in the law. In 1888, here in the US, the Supreme Court said, under the designation of person, there is no doubt that a private corporation is included in the 14th Amendment. Such corporations are merely associations of individuals united for a special purpose and permitted to do business under a particular name and have a succession of members without dissolution. So here it is, a collective being made up of us. And guess what? These new world-spanning platforms are these collective beings made up of us, but with an independent purpose and existence, as we see with corporations. You can take individual humans out, but they still have their goals, which are encoded into them. And so if you think of Google and Facebook as the next evolutionary step, you can ask yourself interesting questions. Because we understand when we look at Google and Facebook that these are systems that have algorithmic objective functions. Google is always trying to optimize for relevance, both in ads and in the content that it shows you, the search results. Facebook has been trying to optimize for engagement. And so then you start thinking, well, what's happening as the objective function of another one of these great proto-AIs, our financial markets? Here's the Equinix New York 4 data center, trillions of dollars change hands there. Looks just like the pictures you'll see of the Google data centers, right? What are we telling those systems to optimize for? What is the objective function of our financial markets and our corporations? And I think the objective function was set by economist Milton Friedman in 1970 when he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times called "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits." That idea took hold in society, in the global mind, and that is the point when you see this great divergence between the continued rise of productivity, right on that curve that Steve Jurvetson was talking about, but the real median family income of actual ordinary people. Right? Because we stopped saying optimize for people. The purpose of an economy is actually to serve humans. We said, no, it's to serve some number of small humans who are part of this new collective life form. So this is all explored in a couple of really interesting books. One is called Makers and Takers by Rana Foroohar. Another, The Golden Passport by Duff McDonald. Duff's book talks about how Harvard Business School kind of spread this ideology. Rana really talks about the way that this is really at the heart of many of our current economic problems. She says the single biggest unexplored reason for long-term slower growth, as well as income inequality, is the financial system has stopped serving the real economy, and it now serves mainly itself. So think about it this way. The financial market was once a useful handmaiden to human exchange of goods and services, become the master. And it is the master of all the other collective intelligences, Google, Facebook, Amazon. They're ultimately answerable to financial markets. So we have told this financial market what to optimize for. We've given it an objective function. And we have to ask ourselves, is it the right one? Just as Facebook is saying, well, that wasn't quite what we had in mind, when they wrote their function for engagement and it was subverted. They're trying to fix it. We have to fix our financial markets in the same way. I have a friend now, unfortunately dead for some years, who told me something in the early years of Macintosh programming that's always stuck with me. He said, the art of debugging is figuring out what you really told your program to do rather than what you thought you told it to do. And that's what we have to do with the rules that we've encoded into our broader society. Are they producing the intended outcome? This engagement that we have with our technology is also the engagement that we have to have with our entire society and the rules of our society going forward. Is it human hostile or is it human enhancing? So there's a lot of reasons why I'm hopeful, but the biggest one is that bias encoded and taken to scale becomes visible. We're starting to see these biases in our society because we are encoding them. And so when we see things like, wow, credit scoring, this has all this hidden bias in the training data, has hidden bias in the algorithms. We've got to fix this. We are coming to grips with this, and we can come to grips with it, and it can make us better people, and it can make a better society. And so we're going to learn from AI. This is from a slide from OpenAI. It's bot versus bot, but learning from bots, learning from AI about what will make us better. The most hopeful thing I've seen was this wonderful line from Fan Hui on the 37th move of the second game between AlphaGo and Lee Sedol, where he said, "It's not a human move. I've never seen a human play this move. So beautiful, so beautiful." And that's the thing. I would much rather search for the AI that makes beautiful moves, that makes beautiful insights into the way that we play this game of human survival, that we play this game of human flourishing, and it helps us build a better future. And that should be your goal as you build, not to build profit-seeking AIs that disregard humans. Find a way to build AI that is beautiful and that helps us to build a better world. That's why I say, what's the future? It's up to us. Thank you very much.